Welcome to Versailles. Today we're going to be exploring one of the most beautiful palaces in France, which was made famous by Louis XIV, the Sun King. To be honest, you really need a full day in order to see everything that Versailles has to offer, so I wouldn't really plan a half-day trip here. When you come to Versailles, there are 5 distinctive things to see. There's the main palace, there are the gardens, there's the Grand Trianon, there's the Petit Trianon, and there's the Hameau de la Reine, which is the Queen's Hamlet. In this video, we're going to show you all 5 things. Like many royal residences in France, Versailles actually began life as a somewhat humble hunting lodge, having been established by Louis XIII, who was Louis XIV's father. Yes, it becomes a bit confusing because they're all called Louis. Anyway, Louis XIV never really got to know his father very well because he inherited the throne upon the death of his father at just 4 years old. His early ascension to the throne meant that his reign ended up being 72 years long, which is the longest of any European monarch ever. Louis XIV had fond memories of his childhood at Versailles, and so in 1682 he made the bold choice to move his court from Paris to Versailles, thus beginning a period of transformation where the rustic abode was transformed into the opulent palace that is so famed today. This golden age of Versailles, however, did not last as long as you might think, because in 1789, during the French Revolution, Louis XVI, together with Marie Antoinette, were forced to leave Versailles for Paris, thus ending the palace's time as a royal residence. If you want to get the best value for money, then you'll want to book the passport ticket. This includes all of the different buildings, although the gardens themselves are normally free to the public. The passport ticket is either €24 or €36, depending on when you come, whether it's high season or low season. We're currently technically in the low season, which was only €24, but it does mean that there are a few negatives to visiting at this time. Firstly, the gardens are definitely not at their best. The trees don't have any leaves on them. The fountains are wrapped up, and the other thing is that the side of the chateau isn't very aesthetic at the moment. There's lots of scaffolding as there are renovation works going on. So yeah, the best time to visit is probably late spring, early summer. Even though the gardens might not be at their peak right now, the best thing about visiting at this time is that firstly, the price is obviously lower, and the other thing is that we can see more details of the palace than normal because we can get closer to the things because there are just fewer crowds. I've been to Versailles before in the summer, and honestly it was a bit manic, so today is definitely a more pleasant experience if you're not really into crowded places. If you're coming to Versailles, then one thing is sure, you'll definitely end up walking a lot, especially inside the palaces, and I think we're going to end up walking over 20,000 steps today. If you want to get around the grounds in style, you can actually rent a golf buggy. However, it is a bit pricey at €42 per hour and €10.50 per 15 minutes after that, so the buggy is definitely a good choice if you're traveling, for example, with children. A more affordable option is to take the little tourist train, which costs €5 per journey per person. There are also little bikes you can rent.
Next station, Versailles-Château-Rive-Gauche, terminus of this train.
It's a beautiful day here at Versailles, and we're going to go and visit the palace now. We have timed entrance tickets for 9 AM, which is the first slot you can get, but I don't know how much of a queue there'll be. I haven't been to the palace in 5 years, and Antoine hasn't been in like 20, so let's go and check it out. We've arrived at 9:04, so let's see how long the queue takes to get in. It doesn't seem like it's going to take very long. It's 9:13 now and we're already in, so I would say that's pretty good going considering the queue looked quite long. It's actually not too long of a wait. The Royal Chapel is one of the most impressive feats of engineering within Versailles, which is saying something in such a grandiose palace. Inspired by Gothic architecture, the chapel was dedicated to St. Louis, who was the patron saint of Louis XIV and was also an ancestor of the royal house. We're currently visiting the stateroom section of the palace. Now, the one thing to note is that Louis XIV's life was quite ritualistic, and so he had to do the same kinds of things in front of courtiers each day in order to retain his power, and that's what happened in these rooms. One thing I think is worth noting is that if you come on a rainy day, don't be too disappointed about the weather, because you'll actually get to see the interiors much better. It's such a sunny day today that it's actually hard to make out the details of the paintings inside. Louis XIV's full name was actually Louis Dieu donné, i.e. Louis God-given. He inherited from his mother the idea that it was his God-given right to rule, and he was actually his parents' first surviving child after 23 years of marriage. Before the sumptuous renovation works, the first nobles to stay at Versailles actually called the palace a mistress without merit. Well, things obviously changed entirely during the reign of Louis XIV, because when you're wandering through the King's State apartments now, there is grandeur and opulence around every single turn. After you've made your way through the 7 staterooms, which bear the name of a Roman deity, you'll come to the Hall of Mirrors. This is the most ornate, illustrious, beautiful place in the entirety of the palace, and it's just, we have to go and look at it. The Hall of Mirrors is 73 meters in length, and it was actually originally designed by Louis XIV to replace a terrace which had been on site, which once connected the King's apartments to the Queen's apartments. Now, today is just so extravagant, and it was originally built to kind of show how powerful the monarchy of France was at the time. Visitors to this room would never have seen a room so stunning in all their lives, and so they would have been wowed, just as we have been. When you first get to the Hall of Mirrors, don't be shocked by the number of tourists. Everyone stops at the beginning of the hall to take their photos, but what you should do is walk all the way down to the other end, because this area is way less crowded. As you can probably see, we've got a lot of space around us compared to at the front. The King's apartment served as the living quarters of Louis XIV, and the rooms here are nestled within the oldest part of the palace. You see, when Louis XIV decided to carry out renovation works on Versailles, he actually kept the original hunting lodge at its very core, and so this is enveloped by the later additions. The Queen's apartment consists of several rooms, and the most sumptuous of them all is the Queen's bedchamber, which was designed for Queen Marie-Thérèse of Austria. The coronation room started out as a chapel, then a guards room, and was eventually dedicated to Napoleon Bonaparte in 1833. The Gallery of Battles was built to replicate one that's similar in the Louvre, and was constructed to glorify French military history. We've been in here for almost 2 hours now, and I think we've seen most of the palace, but to be honest, we didn't even have that much time to spend in each room because it's so vast. I'm a bit tired already. Although there are quite a lot of food options on site, the food is quite pricey and is also not great quality, so I would definitely take sandwiches if I were to visit Versailles again anytime soon. In 1661, Louis XIV decided that he would need a monumental garden to match his illustrious palace. He entrusted the task to André Le Nôtre, who is widely considered to be the father of the French landscaped garden. The work ended up taking over 40 years because of the amount of work that needs to be carried out. Canals were dug, terraces were made, soil was moved, and legions of men were used in order to create what you see today. And that's not all. In fact, because of the nature of the trees, the shrubs, the plants which were planted, it actually meant that the garden had to be renewed every 100 years or so. And so even today, a whole army of gardeners maintain the beautiful palace gardens just as they would have looked several hundred years ago. This is the Apollo fountain, and it was constructed between 1668 and 1671 in the Gobelin factory in Paris. It was actually brought here to Versailles before being gilded the following year. It was always meant to be in this location, which is a central perspective, which is when you look out of the Hall of Mirrors, you can see this amazing central avenue, which is crowned by several fountains, and this was always meant to be the centerpiece. It was designed by Lebrun. When you're exploring Versailles, you'll find these continuous elements of Apollo, and that's because Louis XIV wanted to style himself as Apollo, the sun god, who is also the god of peace, of reason, of the arts. And Louis XIV did this. He put these symbols all over his palace, over his kingdom, because he wanted people to see him as a patron of the arts, as someone who brought warmth to France, as someone who just had the divine right from God, and there should be no intervention from anyone else, because Louis XIV literally saw himself as an Apollo of France, which is a bit crazy. Because it's so exposed to the elements, obviously the fountain has to be restored every few decades or so, and we're really lucky at the moment because it was restored for the last time last year. It was opened to the public once more in August of 2024, so it's really shiny. And now that we're at the back of the fountain, you get really an idea of the perspective of how the garden is meant to look, with the chateau at the back, the Grand Canal behind us, and then this beautiful fountain as a central gem. One of the coolest things about the garden is all of the different activities on offer. For example, here on the Grand Canal, you can actually rent a rowboat starting from €16 per half hour. You can have maximum of 4 people in the boat, and you actually pay at the end. So you pay for what you consume, like for how long you spend on the water. You just leave an ID card and then pay at the end. Maybe we'll have time later. If you think that the Palace of Versailles is busy today, then you can get somewhat of an idea of what it would have been like during the reign of Louis XIV. So now we're going to see the place where Louis would have retreated away from the nobles, from the courtesans, and from the peasants. Essentially, in the 17th century, Louis XIV decided that he no longer wanted to move from court to court, palace to palace, and he would actually force all of his noblemen to come here to Versailles, where they would also end up being subjugated to horrible living conditions. At times, there could be up to 10,000 courtesans living in the buildings surrounding Versailles, and so the conditions got really, really putrid. It was said that people would often relieve themselves in the most unexpected of places, using latrines, in the throne room, in the royal chapel, things like that. And it's even alleged that one time Marie Antoinette was hit with some falling human waste when she was walking through an interior courtyard. Thus, it was completely horrible. So Louis XIV did what any self-respecting king would do. He built himself his own palace, a little getaway from Versailles, still within the grounds, and called it the Grand Trianon. This also allowed him to undergo an uninterrupted affair with his mistress. The Grand Trianon is sometimes known as the Marble Trianon thanks to this beautiful pink marble that makes up most of the structure. It's also based on Italian designs, and the gardens here are a bit more formal than anywhere else in the Versailles grounds. In the 18th century, it was somewhat abandoned, and it was revived and brought back to life when Napoleon I chose to live here with his wife. By the reign of Napoleon III, it had been turned into a museum of sorts, and it had become a bit more eclectic. Today, there's a lot of furniture, there's fewer paintings than in the main palace, but there's a lot more furniture to see. Gosh, this has been such a long day and we haven't even seen everything. We've stopped to get a coffee. Luckily, there are places to get food, drink, snacks all over the domain. Of course, you could bring your own snacks, but it's quite convenient to be able to get a coffee for a pick-me-up whenever you want. It's now just a short walk to reach our final destination of the day, which is the Petit Trianon and the Queen's Hamlet. Upon Louis XIV's death, his son Louis XV became King of France. He initially started out by moving into the Grand Trianon, but he soon decided that actually his tastes were a bit different to that of his father's, and so he commissioned the Petit Trianon to be built in the neoclassical style. Later on, in 1774, Louis XVI actually gifted this domain to his wife, Marie Antoinette. She would come here with her close friends, her children, her close family members basically, and she would really enjoy quiet time away from the pomp and circumstance of the court. It was here that she could really be herself, and she even re-landscaped the gardens in the Anglo-Chinois style. The idea behind these palaces was to be a little bit rustic and to really exude an air of calm and serenity in comparison to the hustle and bustle of the main palace. This is Le Petit Trianon, and you can really get a sense of how quiet it is. The king would have come here, he would have eaten fresh farm-grown vegetables and just really enjoyed calm and peace. Of all the different kinds of gardens that you can see at Versailles, this is probably my favorite because there's a grotto, there's several amazing sculptured buildings within the grounds of the garden, and it also leads on to one of the quietest, quaintest places of them all, the Queen's Hamlet. It's always funny to me that people would build these really structured, beautifully laid out gardens, and then they would add a grotto that's more reminiscent of a cave and the natural world in the 18th century. In 1783, Queen Marie Antoinette commissioned her favourite architect to build her a little farm where she could come and play dress up and spend time with her closest friends. There was a boudoir, a tower in the form of a lighthouse, a windmill, a barn that was actually burnt down during the French Revolution, and a variety of other houses. They all worked as a working farm to provide eggs, vegetable, things like that for the Queen. But there were stories of the fact that when Queen Marie Antoinette did come down here, she would have all of the animals washed before she played with them and touched them. Today, there's still a small farm at the hamlet and you can meet animals of all shapes and sizes. Just be sure not to touch them or feed them, as they have people caring for them. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because if you enjoyed this video about Versailles, you'll probably enjoy this video about Paris.